Hello everyone, my name is Bryce, and in this video, we're going to look at how we can sculpt a human skull using ZBrush. The footage you're about to see is actually a snippet from a course that I'm teaching this summer called Anatomy for Digital Artists. Below, you'll find a link if you wish to pick up the sculpted skull file along with the reference I used in this footage. I hope you find this content useful, and I'll see you next time. So I kind of went through and gathered some skull images and threw them in here. I think this is pretty good enough to be able to sculpt the skull. So if we're looking through here, you can see these are kind of some references I got from that Anatomy for Sculptors book. And it's like little tips like this that I think are super helpful in that book. It's like you should understand kind of like this angle. Like if your skull, if the orbital is looking kind of weird in this area, it could be something as simple as like, oh, maybe you made the lower part of the orbital kind of out further than the upper part. So like tips like this help. The head isn't perfectly round, it's not a perfect oval either. It kind of tapers in the front and you're more flat in the front of the head and round in the back of the head. So this is kind of the things I'm looking for when I'm gathering reference to kind of make these complex shapes simplified, and like really break them down to the fundamentals. I guess these basic shapes and forms is super helpful when you, especially when you're doing something complex like a human skull. Because a lot of times what I think we do is like we just try to recreate what we see without really understanding what we're looking at, and that's kind of the big pitfall I see in a lot of artists. So we really want to just, it's tedious, it's a lot more work than just looking at one photo and trying to sculpt it. But really what we want to do is we want to see these shapes, see these patterns, make sure our proportions are right. And that's what we want to do to create really awesome artwork. And then even if you're doing stylized stuff, you still would want to understand what it looks like realistically, so you know what you need to push, what you need to like focus on when you're like pushing proportions for stylized stuff and whatnot. Okay. So PureRef is a free software, and basically, oh, I should have had my raw photos, but all I did was I Googled and I used like Pinterest and stuff. I gathered some photos, I put them in a folder, and I just dragged all those folders into this PureRef software, and I kind of placed them into an order I like, so I know where stuff is. All right. So a lot of people will like just have their reference on their other scene and check their proportions by doing like paint overs and stuff, or yeah, like a paint over. But what we can actually do, what I like to do when I'm working on proportion stuff in the beginning, is actually bring in a really good reference so I can have those views in my scene to block out the reference. So how we do that is that file that I just uploaded, you'd want to grab that. So this one. And just put it somewhere where you know how to access it. So I'm just going to put it on my desktop. And what I can do is I can use my, it's in the draw palette or menu. So what I want to do is I'm going to use this a lot, and when I click off, it goes away. So I'm just going to dock this for convenience sake. To dock it, I'm just going to expand the divider, double click this icon right here, go to my draw, and to dock it, you just grab like this kind of circle with the diagonal arrow and just drag it right there, and I'll collapse my brush one. Okay. Anybody need me to repeat what I just did?
Yeah, just it's not docking for me.
The docking? Okay, let me. Okay,
It's just
so
going over to the right side.
um, right side. Wait, did you expanded this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, you
I
have
have
to.
to. Okay, my bad. There
Oh,
it
you're good.
goes.
You're good. And then draw. Grab the doodad. Bam. Click and drag. Okay. We good?
Yeah.
I'm a little lost.
Okay.
Do we have to open ZBrush and like put this file on there?
No. Uh,
Okay.
so hold on. You have ZBrush open, right?
No, I can't open it because I can't connect to the VPN and can't put the licenses where I need
Oh
them.
shoot. Okay. So,
Yeah.
what we're going to
I
need to do,
figured I might want to like meet with you later just to not
yeah,
waste everyone else's time.
yeah, what we're going to do is we're probably going to have to email somebody um to make sure, cuz I think a couple people might have had this issue where they had to email somebody for the VPN. So we'll do that
Okay.
and then I am recording these so you'll be able to go back and check
Okay.
them out. All
All
right.
right. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we got this doc. So now let's bring in our reference images. So it's kind of a process, but what we need to do is we need to first import that image into ZBrush. So I hit texture uh, in this list right here. Texture. Oops. Oh, come on. Import. Navigate to where I saved that skull file and just double click it. So now you can see it's right there. So now we got to load this into the kind of reference image planes for ZBrush. So the first one I need that front image. So I'll hit in my draw palette, I'll go to front back, and map 1 is going to be the front. So I'll hit that map 1, and then I'll select my skull. And you can see here. So what we want to do is we want to align the front as best we can to the front of our object. You don't really want to move the object because if you do that, it throws off the center line, and that can cause issues down the line. Even though we can do some things to kind of repair that center line, it's kind of a pain in the butt in ZBrush. So we really want to move this reference. To do that in our draw palette, we can just do horizontal offset and line it up as best we can. So really the center, make sure we're in orthographic view. That's super important too. So I was in perspective, and if I tried to line this up, it just doesn't work in perspective. If you're using reference images, you need to be in orthographic. So I'll uncheck this so I'm in orthographic. So I'm not getting that perspective distortion. All right, so let's play with the horizontal shift. I'm kind of looking at this line right here. Might be hard to see on Discord, but I'm trying to find the center of the skull, or maybe between the teeth is a good place to kind of line that up. And we're just eyeballing it. It doesn't need to be precise. What you don't want is something like heavily skewed like this, but if you get it pretty close, I hate how it snaps though. Let's do negative 0.045. Nope. 0.45, I think. There we go. There we go. That's close enough. So when you do it this way too, you want to make sure like you're looking kind of at 1/2 of the skull. Just so you're not, yeah, because it's not perfectly centered, so that's okay though. Oh, something I didn't mention about the skull. We'll definitely like a lot of these concepts when we talk about different body parts we'll rehash, but like no two skulls are going to be exactly the same, right? There's all these differences between ethnicities, gender, and even just the same gender ethnicity between individuals, right? So just keep that stuff in mind. But a lot of these larger concepts like proportions and stuff are pretty true. True to life. So like if we look here, you can see like remember that tip in our reference about the top of the orbital being out further than the bottom. Like that kind of stuff is pretty consistent. But we should keep that stuff in mind. All right, so let's get our side reference in. So if I go to perspective, we want to be able to see our reference on this side. So what I'll do is in right and left, I think it's going to be the left one. So we'll hit map 1 and we'll bring that image in. So since we're only using 2 references, we can kind of eyeball. Oops, I don't want to move my object. Even though I could move it because we are not symmetrical in the Y or the Z. But what I want to do is I want to go back to orthographic view. And I want to adjust the horizontal offset something like this. And I think I'm just kind of looking at the front of the head. Make sure that lines up. So now when I need to bounce back between my front and side orthographic view, I can hold shift, or I can start orbiting, then hold shift, and then it will snap to the side, snap to the front. So when I'm doing proportions, I definitely work a lot in orthographic, but then you have to just keep in mind when we're like sculpting in probably like finer detail or just refining the form, I guess, but we have our proportions, then maybe you would want to work in perspective, especially if a lot of your reference images are in perspective. All right, so that's how we can set up our reference images, and then to toggle those on and off, all you need to do is hit this floor icon, or it's Shift P is the shortcut. But we'll keep it on for now. So now I'm done with this draw palette, so I can go ahead and minimize that and get some more space back this way. Now it's the part that we actually sculpt. The first brush I typically start with is going to be the move brush. We can actually move this up vertically. So I'm going to hit W on my keyboard and just move it up. So we're kind of getting the top of the head. And I don't want to move it left to right, though, because then I'll mess up my X symmetry, right? So even though I can see it's like poking out a little bit, oops, right here, it's fine. I can scale it in a little bit if I need to. All right, so let's go. I'm going to hit Q to go back to my sculpt tool, and I will use my move brush. And I'm going to make it really big. And oops, I'm on standard brush. So let's go to our move brush. So if we hit B, hit M and V, have a move brush. So this is what I was mentioning in the other one. You want to make sure you have like less resolution when you're blocking out larger forms. Because it can cause like lumpy issues and stuff. I'm only going to focus on probably the top half of the skull for the sake of time, so I'm probably only going to go to here. But what a lot of people do is when they're doing like the mandible in there too, is they'll like block out the whole thing. And I have some links to some resources too, and you'll see that. And they might do it like that, and then they'll carve away to get the mandible. But for the sake of time, I am going to focus on the top of the skull. Okay. Our front view. Let's just do brush. Okay, and then remember, if we remember that tip, the head kind of tapers toward the front a bit. So I'm looking at my reference, and this is the shape we want to get. Okay, I think another tip for the skull is like the widest point is going to be like right here somewhere. So I think that's on track. And if we could had a top view, I think that would have been nice to bring in too, especially when you're doing the zygomatic arch. But I think we'll be okay. All right, this. I think this is a good start. So now what we want to do is start getting more definition. I think we can still sculpt some detail at this resolution, so let's see what we can do with it. I'm going to start bringing this in. This is where it gets hard because it's like I was using the silhouette before, but now I have to rely on my reference and say, well, I know if we, like, this is kind of like that horseshoe shape, right? So it kind of comes in, the zygomatic bone kind of scoops inward and slopes down. So that's kind of the shape I am blocking out right now. You can kind of see it better in this one, I think. So let's do that. Even before we do that, though, we can start maybe blocking in the nasal opening in the orbitals. But might need more resolution. So I'm going to use my clay buildup brush to carve in. So I'll hit B, C, B. Oops. Hold Alt to carve in. And let's do that. I don't think we have enough resolution for the nasal opening, but I think if we can block it out a little bit, that's okay. We're getting something like this. Okay, so we could either Dynamesh it again, which I think I'm going to do. I don't want to subdivide it, really. So let's Dynamesh at a higher resolution. So our sphere started at 32. If we need more resolution, we're going to need to up this number. So let's Dynamesh to like 64. Oops. There we go. So now we have more resolution to work with. So I'm going back in, kind of refining the orbital. I find that the orbits and the nasal are good landmarks to kind of block in. And then just make sure you're rotating and make sure it's looking somewhat decent. Okay. Let's start defining some of these shapes more. What is this? Smooth that out. So I'm going to actually carve here too, because that comes in pretty far. Smooth it out. Really want that shape. I'm looking at the bottom. I have that reference for the bottom. I can start tweaking that too. You'll notice a lot of sometimes I'll just jump around to different parts. And that's kind of nice because if you focus like solely on one part and then you think you're done, you move on to something else, and you'd never come back to it, it might not be the best. So what you'll see is a lot of people in ZBrush when they're sculpting things, they'll jump around different parts. They'll kind of, like, obviously I'm not done with like these parts, right? But I noticed this was kind of messed up, so I got a fresh eyes on this kind of shape down here. Kind of just popped in my head. I was like, oh, maybe I should make sure my shape of kind of my the roof of my mouth is correct, right? So that's the kind of stuff you want to do as well. All right. So I think this is looking good, but looking at my reference, especially this guy, you can see we have this, you can really see like that zygomatic bone carving in and kind of going back out to form the cusp of the top of the jaw. And I don't have that shape represented. So I can use my clay buildup brush. So BCB. And now I've been using my mouth like a noob. So let me actually turn my tablet back on. Because for moving stuff, it's like really precious sensitivity doesn't matter. And I sculpted in pretty hard to get those. But now I want to use my tablet. Make sure I'm using it. And so I'm just lightly kind of carving this shape in. by holding Alt and using my clay buildup brush. And you can kind of start seeing I'm getting that shape. Okay, and if it's exaggerated, I think exaggerating is a bit better than under-exaggerating because you can always dial it back, but sometimes it's kind of harder to push the forms more. Okay, let me do BMV to get my move brush. Oops, and I accidentally hit B. So if this happens to you, you just swap the, you hit B, oops, or V, excuse me, and I just swapped it from white to black. So I'll just hit, oops, just bring it back up to white. So now I'm going to focus kind of more on this area because this slope is just not sloping in that much. So I'll hit BMV. Really want to get that slope in there. Also, make it smaller. I want to start defining this. So I know this comes back, right? Because we want to make sure we get that line from the top of the orbit down to the bottom of the orbit. Let's bring this in a little bit. We'll build this back up, our brow ridge, with the clay buildup probably. And we need this shape to come out. So I just using my move brush, move that out. And we're kind of blocking that out. And maybe we make it a little bit wider. Okay. Just moving along the orbital, make sure I kind of these shapes. Okay. So you can see it's starting to look like a skull now. So we're on the right track. Anytime you're sculpting like anything, you're going to go through like a phase where it just looks bad. Like no matter what you do, you just have to trust in the process and then look at your reference and like remind yourself like, hey, I'm on the right track. Because like no matter how good you are, a person is, like it's going to look weird starting off. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's start defining some more of these shapes. Especially, we want to start getting this zygomatic process in. Oops. And some of these brow ridges. So I'm going to use my clay buildup brush. I use the clay buildup brush. I should probably explain. Some people like to use clay tubes. Where is that? I think it's CT, right? Yep. And let me just turn my... So clay tubes, it just works differently. You can see like I'm building up the volume, but as long as I keep my my mouse down, it's like not stacking more on top of that tube. But if I do this, let go, and then repress down, it's stacking on top, but it's not stacking on top of that new stroke I made. So it works a little bit differently, whereas clay buildup, it just consistently, it will build up on itself, right? Even if I don't take my pin off of it. Okay. Alright, so zygomatic arch, let's bring up in the temple is what I'm going to focus on now. What time is it? I think we're good for time. Might have to fly through the... Let's just bring this shape in there. And we can always cut this down a little bit. So I'm subtracting some of the mesh to exaggerate because there's a hole in the zygomatic process or arch where the muscle connects to like this temple arch and comes down to the jaw. So you gotta, this is gonna be pretty exaggerated. And I did this a different way when I was running through it last week. But I'm going to try to keep it simpler because that involved me like using snake hook and then dynameshing it to get the hole. But I want to try a different method. So let's start blocking some of this stuff in. This goes down pretty far. And we need this. Honestly, this comes in. Just block this out. And look at our front view. It's kind of hard. It is hard to see like this front view where this bone comes out. So let's beef that up a little bit and just really carve this in, I think. And smooth. Okay. I lied. I'm going to use the snake hook technique, I think. So let's just go ahead and carve this in. Smooth it. So again, hopefully you guys can see though, how blocky. Like it's not. I'm not worried about like seeing like these kind of square things going on because I'm really focusing on the shapes and forms. Because once you get that right, smoothing out stuff and whatnot is pretty easy. Oftentimes when people like sculpt people, they'll just kind of coast through these bigger volume steps and go straight to like that high frequency detail, like especially when they're sculpting like skin on it. They'll like get the wrinkles and pores, and those will look right, but their foundation is lacking. Because it is kind of easier, in my opinion, to get that detail in there. Anybody can do that. But getting these forms in, this is where you want to spend your time to make sure it's right. Alright, let's try this snake hook method. Normally, how I do this is I like Boolean stuff out, but I don't really want to do that, I think. Okay. BMV to go to my move brush. And I need to find reference of that bottom view. So this actually, oops, comes out way further. So I'm in my move brush, so let's just bring this out further. Probably actually just define it with the sculpt brush. And this is what I was talking about. I should have maybe waited to do. It's gonna work out. Okay, so where does this connect? So here's our ear hole. So it kind of connects right here and swoops up a bit. So this is where masking can come in handy because I'm like moving this, but you can see it's moving like that back of the skull with it too. So sometimes I'm going to go to, oops, accidentally dynameshed. Hold control and do a marquee selection. So I'm holding control and basically I am masking. It's hard to see with the floor, so let's go ahead and hide that. I'm masking these polygons. And what I can do is now I can like move stuff around the mask without affecting it. But I want to invert the mask. So I'm going to hold control, tap it, and that masks everything out. It inverts the mask, masks out that, and then now I can move this freely. So that's helpful. Alright, so where does this zygomatic arch attach? Let's do right here. Alright, so when I dynamesh, this is going to do two things for me. Let's actually bring this in. I don't think it goes out quite that far. Yeah, if we look at the top, I'm looking at my reference. You can see it right here a little bit. I should have got better top reference, definitely. But I think I just need to carve it in more to get that hole. So let's bring this in a bit. I can always bring it in after I dynamesh. So dynamesh is going to do two things for me. It's going to give me more resolution here, so I can sculpt in that detail, and it should connect it to this part. So let's go to our geometry palette, turn Dynamesh on. Oh, it's because I'm masked. So to unselect the mask, just hold Control and drag out in space, and then you can Dynamesh. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Looking at the front view, though, this is definitely way too wide, like, just looking at the front. So let's get our floor back on. And is it? Yeah. So I think what we want to do is taper it in more. There we go. And let's work on the top shape bit. And I believe I don't have reference for the back, so that's kind of my bad. It's pretty beefy in the back of the head, but I still think it might taper in like this a little bit. Okay, so I think for the cranium, we're going to call that good. So now we can see in this front view, like, I just didn't make this shape of the zygomatic part thick enough. It's tapering in too much. So we got this scoop, but now it needs to come out and down. Let's go ahead and kind of play with this shape. I'll sculpt that in there. I think I'm going to use my clay buildup. Go ahead and hide this. Then I need to look at some of my reference in perspective too, just to make sure I'm getting that shape. So I'm going to go ahead and turn perspective on. Kind of look at it in perspective. I think we're on the right track. This is pretty exaggerated though. Let's go ahead and build that up. Okay. Looks pretty good. Carve in the orbit hole more. Bro, I think we got pretty decent shapes. Smooth this out bit. We got that arch. And let's make sure that's not sticking out too much. So go back to ortho. Yeah, I think this is just coming out way too much. So BMV for my move tool. Oh, it's not. It's kind of going out in my reference. Maybe I'll undo that because it was actually not too bad. Again, this reference looks like it's somebody else's 3D sculpt, so it's probably not going to be as precise as like it could be. All right, let's go ahead and let's get a little bit more resolution. So I'll crank this up to maybe like 100. Dynamesh it, so I got a little bit more resolution to work with. Let's go ahead and turn the floor off. So that's actually looking really good. Something else to keep in mind when you're doing anatomy is these kind of like planes, surface planes. I think that's helpful because if you get really strong surface planes, that can add a lot. So you can see like right here, it's pretty smooth, which maybe we do want. I think the male skull has like a kind of a flatter surface here, and the female skull is typically more rounded. But oops, where'd my reference go? I kind of want to pay attention to these planes to really push this a bit more. So what I can do, hit the home page button. Let's take out Damien Standard. And Damien Standard is a cool brush. It kind of carves in. So let's make it smaller. Carves in. But if you hold Alt, it can carve out. So we can start like maybe defining this shape a bit more. Let's kind of carve in. Let's make it bigger. Smooth it. So you can see how we're adding a bit more definition with that Damien Standard brush. And just be careful when you smooth it. So let me turn perspective on though, because the reference image I'm looking at is in perspective. BMV. I don't know how precise I want to take this because we still got one more thing we gotta get through today. So I might have to cut it short a little bit. A really strong feature is this bridge, though, the bridge of the nose. So I'm gonna go to Damien Standard, and we can actually use a brush called H Polish. And what this brush does is it like kind of flattens, and you can be soft with it. So if we want it to get some of those planes, we can use the H Polish brush. Now, obviously that reference that I just showed is like way exaggerated. But if we use it, you can see we can start defining some of these planes. And we can then go back with our smooth brush, kind of smooth it out a little bit. Just got to be careful that you're not getting too many hard spots and whatnot. And you can see I accidentally smoothed my brow ridge a bit more than I would like. So I can go back in maybe with a large Damien Standard and try to get that brow ridge back and soften it just a little bit. So yeah, I really like the Damien Standard for like trying to bring back some of this harsher detail, like these edge creases. Super helpful. And I think all right. So I think overall, well, the teeth, that's kind of a different story. Might not be able to do that. Let me turn perspective off the floor. Let's black out the teeth. So you can do the teeth a couple different ways. How I would normally do it is I would cut out like holes and sockets for the teeth and then append the teeth as different tools, just because that gives me more freedom to like edit them if I need be, if I need to. But let's go ahead and block using the Damien Standard brush where these teeth are. So I did 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. Go. Bam. So let me solo this, turn the floor off. Let's go ahead and actually subdivide. I don't think I really need to worry about like crazy Dynamesh things to either, because I'm not going to be pulling out extreme objects. I'm not going to be welding parts of the mesh together like I did for the arch. So now I'm just going to use my Control D to subdivide it one more time to give me a bit more geometry to mess with when I'm sculpting. And actually, I am going to use Damien Standard, I think, for this. So now you see I have that extra resolution, so I kind of lost detail here. But oops. Can't remember if this was tooth there or whatnot. I think it was. Can open my other scene to show you guys how I did the teeth for that one, because I think it's gonna this is too much work in my opinion to kind of form the teeth. So what I did for the teeth is I really just like did this, but then I went in with like a clay buildup brush, and like I really took this mesh in, like I just dug in and sculpted the kind of the sockets for the teeth, right? So I really took this mesh down. And so you get this kind of thing. And then what I did is I kind of went to my subtool. I went to append. And I brought in a new sphere. Hold Alt, clicked it to select that subtool. And I just scaled it way down. Sometimes I just switch to my mouse because I can't select it. Smush it in. Obviously, you would want reference for your tooth. I'm going kind of quick for the sake of time. And then they kind of go out, right? Use my move brush. I get that shape better. Let's go ahead and throw four back on. And then I got my H polish brush, and lightly start sculpting on here. And then for the teeth, I wasn't like too precise. I kind of know how a teeth should. This brush might be too big. That's okay. In the back, I'm not really too concerned about. It's too thick, we can scale it. And what I did from there is like basically I made sure this was good, and then I would duplicate it, go to my move tool, move it, rotate it, move it in place, and then you do want to go in with the move tool because like you have different kind of teeth, like incisors, canine, and molars. So you would just look up, you'd have reference of the anatomy of kind of the different shapes of the teeth, and then go from there. So that's kind of sloppy for now, but for the sake of time, we'll just keep it like that. And you will not want to go in and make sure like these. I mean, it depends on the person, right? But typically, I would close that gap more. Does somebody have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, would you also be able to, like, just use one tool, like one shape, and then carve that out into, like, the full row of teeth, or would you want us to just do an individual shape for each tooth?
You could do it that way too. That is a completely valid way. So you're saying like make another shape that's kind of like this horseshoe shape and then sculpt in the teeth on that?
Yeah.
I would prefer I would prefer that over like trying to sculpt the teeth off of the skull for sure.
Okay.
But whatever way looks good is fine.
Okay.
So yeah, that's actually I never thought of that. So that's a really good good observation.
That was my first thought. Like, I thought you were gonna do that at first.
Yeah.
But this works too.
So let's try to spend maybe 13 more minutes on this, see how far I can get. Some things I would do. This is kind of blobby, so I'd want to go in and sharpen this. Maybe Dame Standard. Really get this shape. This nose bridge. It's pretty strong, bony landmark once you put flesh on top of it. So I might try to push this a bit more. Maybe the orbits too. It's pretty soft, but you should have. Oops, Damien Standard. Kind of want. Again, I'm looking at that reference of the planes of the face to help me define like where this stuff should be. So this should be kind of a harder, like you can see the face of this. That's kind of what I'm trying to define here. I always have trouble with this part, I think. Just getting the planes of this area correct. So let me pull that up. Oops. Hold Alt. So defining that is obviously a bit better, but it's not 100%. So I can see here, maybe I just did that too narrow. Inside is right here. Yeah, I messed up. It's supposed to come here. Let's actually use the move tool. So yeah, having that like I cannot stress enough like how important reference is, and that you're bouncing between reference, you're getting into perspective as well, and just kind of looking at it the same perspective as your reference. And then the tricky thing is, again, with the skull, like all these skulls on my reference are all different, right? So that's also a tricky thing to kind of balance, I think. But at the end of the day, trying to make something that looks good. So I think it's kind of deeper here, the cut in, and then it's not as cut in right here. That's kind of what I'm looking at. Okay, and then we definitely my brow ridge is lacking. It's too, I think, soft here. So let's go with our move tool, BMV. And this is maybe something I should have troubleshooted more. Oh, that's another thing I didn't mention about subdivisions. So I can always go back down to my lower subdivision, right? And I can mess with the mesh a little bit. And then, so the nice thing about ZBrush is like all the changes I do at the lower subdivision will propagate up through the subdivision stack, and all the changes I make at the top will propagate down. So that's super handy. Forgot I subdivided. Alright, let's use our H polish brush to kind of get some of these planes back. And let's do Dame Standard. Carve. go back to H polish. And I'll use a smaller smooth brush. I just want to go back because, like, you don't really get these super hard ridges, but having those super hard ridges there is definitely good for, like, visualizing those planes. But I definitely don't want them to be that sharp and pronounced. Except right here. Usually I'll make the bridge of the nose more pronounced, but... Okay, let's look at some reference. Yeah, I think it's not looking too bad. Anything this nose cavity. I think keeping it simple like this is good enough for our purposes. Going over here with the Dame Standard. I think we have... Maybe I'll put the, I forgot what that bone's called. Maybe I'll have that bone in there. Oops. The divider. I didn't put in here this one though. That's looking good though. Oops, and I kind of neglected this area, so let's go back here. We do have like this weird lump. It's for muscle attachments that we need to represent. You can see I'm really not paying attention to the bottom right now, and that's okay. Oh. This lump actually does come pretty far out. I'm just using clay buildup, subtracting and adding to the mesh to get these shapes. And we kind of do have this for the mandible, and another arch over the hole. Kind of settles back in, but I think this does like this a little bit. I think I messed up kind of where it attaches right here, but for our purposes, not too bad. And Damien Standard, also a good way to cut this in. Let's do build up, just and standard. Kind of cut that up a little bit, but I'll just smooth it. There we go. I think that's good enough. So yeah, I think we might call it there. And then obviously we could go in and like, I think this is way too high. I think this needs to come down more, but it's way too exaggerated. Then we could obviously come in and maybe add like some subtle details, like these little pits where nerves come through and stuff. The place where the skull plates fuse. Might need to divide it again though for that kind of detail. So we can always do stuff like that. But like that kind of stuff is like a bonus, really. Really, we want to focus on like getting the shapes right. Yeah, this is hurting my feelings. Let's see if I can fix it real quick. too exaggerated, I think. Something like that's a bit better. This is probably carved in too much. So yeah, I'm looking at like my out of software reference. I think that looks a little bit better. But yeah, does anybody have any questions? The main takeaway I want you guys to get though is like really you gotta focus on these larger forms at lower resolutions. That's always the pitfall I see. People try to add in too much medium to fine frequency detail too quickly, and really you want to take your time to build up these shapes.